Hello, folks. I had to make a slight adjustment, and here we are live now. Okay, so the topic of the day, racism. Does it exist in America? So that's right. Racism, does it exist in America? So in this example, we're going to use some original footage from CNN. Now, we've got people that are on the left camp, the right camp, leftist, right. So CNN, oh, we cannot, that's CNN and discard it. No. That's Fox and discard it. No. Here's what's factual. We're going to show video footage from a broadcast. And let's focus on that. And let's not discount anything because of where it came from. We're just dealing with what is. The question is, does racism exist in America? Now we're going to start, and don't forget, everything's going to be opinion-based. This is arbitrary and subjective, whether it's from my point of view or anything that's being shown to you. So we're going to start off with, obviously, we're going to take some real video footage. You're going to listen to it. And then we're going to make comments. Now, we can make comments by posting in chat. Any opinions, post in chat. Questions, post in chat. Don't be afraid to do that. Okay, so let's go to the first video. And we'll start it now.
Hey, I'm John Avlon, and this is Reality Check on the Extremist Beat. If you want to understand how extremist politics and conspiracy theories have become mainstreamed in America, you've got to look at the rise of hyper-partisan media and how the most divisive messages have been amplified via algorithms that profit off polarization. This didn't happen overnight, but its effect has twisted the American mind, taking us way off center, making audiences addicted to anger, anxiety, and resentment. And all this has a real-world impact. Get this. A 2019 Pew survey found that 73% of Americans believe that Republicans and Democrats cannot agree on basic facts. That's a potential death sentence for a democracy that depends on reasoning together. But it doesn't need to be this way. If we understand how we got here, then we might be able to find reforms and return to something resembling common sense and common ground. But let's take a step back, because we've always had partisan media in America, with Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson slashing each other in the pages of competing broadsheets on the same street in Philadelphia in the 1790s. In more recent history, we've had some analogs to our current predicament, like in the 1950s when we saw the rise of Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin, a conservative populist anti-communist with a demagogue's disregard for facts.
All that Senator McCarthy has been trying to do is expose the communists who have infiltrated the Department of the Army, a very small percentage.
While accusing Democrats of treason, McCarthy often tried to play the victim of, quote, the liberal elite media, equating the Washington Post with the communist Daily Worker. McCarthy's rise on the back of wild accusations caused some newspaper editors to question whether their traditional approach of simply reporting what a public official said was consistent with the larger responsibility of telling the truth. McCarthy finally met his match in Edward R. Murrow, the legendary CBS broadcast news pioneer who took on the senator from Wisconsin by fact-checking his public statements and closing his show in March of 1954 by saying this.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law.
Now fast forward to 1987, when the Fairness Doctrine, designed in a pre-internet era to ensure equal time for opposing views in exchange for leasing public airwaves, was overturned by the FCC. Now, the Senate actually voted 59-31 to reinstate it across bipartisan lines, but it was vetoed by former President Reagan.
President Reagan justified vetoing the Fairness Doctrine legislation by saying that any regulation of content by the federal government is antagonistic to First Amendment rights to free speech.
And this is when partisan media as we know it began to proliferate. Well, get this. One study in the book The Political Spectrum found that that's when talk radio really took off, replacing what had been the most popular radio format before, music. Our country got more polarized as partisan opinion became big business, untethered from any obligation to be fair and balanced. This was the moment that Roger Ailes had been waiting for. A one-time talk show producer turned political consultant, Ailes pushed a political strategy called positive polarization in Richard Nixon's 1968 presidential campaign. And while Nixon repeated,
"The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy. The press is the enemy,"
like a mantra, Ailes envisioned the creation of a conservative news network that could counteract major newspapers and the big three networks at the time. Ailes had the opportunity to operationalize his partisan dream with the launch of Fox News in 1996. Extending the popularity of right-wing talk radio into cable news, the idea was simple and sinister. Only explicit conservative bias could balance the implicit liberal bias of the mainstream media. But in a breathtaking bit of cynicism, this partisan project would be sold as fair and balanced.
We'd like to restore objectivity where we find it lacking.
The partisan media arms race was on. The impact was clear. Just over a decade later, a Pew survey on media credibility found that every news organization or program had seen its credibility marks decline. Even C-SPAN, which of course offers unedited coverage of public events, experienced a steep decline in believability. People literally weren't trusting what they saw with their own eyes. Instead of creating more informed citizens, partisan media compounded tribalism through an echo chamber, a loose network of blogs, talk radio, and cable news that increasingly gave talking points to party leaders rather than vice versa. And then came social media. It promised to break down barriers, but the incentive structures set by algorithms rewarded lies with virality, promoting misinformation with more clicks than actual factual news. It elevated extremism and conspiracy theories into people's feeds, causing something like a collective nervous breakdown, undermining our ability to reason together while sharpening tribal divides. Confronting this blizzard of lies is one of the defining challenges of our times. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by CNN's Oliver Darcy, who covers the intersection of media, politics, and technology, and Kaylin Robertson, a former producer for Alex Jones, who co-founded Future Freedom to help young people radicalized by far-right media.
We've only been at the protest for 5 minutes, and already we've been surrounded by people screaming the words Nazi, white supremacist. We should be able to freely walk down our streets in our own capital.
Oliver and Kaylin, welcome. Kaylin, you said you were radicalized through YouTube, but then you became de-radicalized. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, I remember I was a regular 20-year-old, educated, living in London, had a normal career and everything. I remember the Orlando shooting happened in 2016, never hearing anything like that before, in the Islamist attack, it's America's worst mass shooting. I typed in Orlando shooting into YouTube, and the top-rated results were from Rebel Media, and it was Gavin McGuinness, and it was Milo Yiannopoulos, and they were doing a big stunt outside. I'd never seen these people before. And after watching that video for weeks and months afterwards, was recommended similar content by lots of different creators on my YouTube homepage, on my recommendations. There was nothing, from the opposite being recommended, and ended up having all of my newsfeed for about 6 months, completely giving me a very, very, very distinct worldview.
The blood is on the hands of people like you and the left who have allowed these people to come into our country and caused chaos.
When I was actually involved in it and I started actually working for the sites and the outlets that I believed and I was watching, I started to realize after a year or so that they were selecting stories for me to cover, selectively editing a lot of that stuff. And actually it was a curated reality and it was a fake reality.
Kaylin got out, but I'm sure someone stepped into his shoes. And these are frankly, weapons almost that are being given, to anyone. And a lot of times, bad faith actors, when you have, weapons up for grabs, they seize them and they are happy to use them regardless of the consequences. And I think that's what we see so much today in our politics.
No question. Kaylin, you've said the formula for virality on the creator side of extremist media is really pretty simple. Focus on conflict, feed the algorithm, reinforce the narrative, and don't worry if it's true. That's a pretty sinister formulation.
It's basically working from whatever is going to do best with the algorithms, starting with a thumbnail or a concept that people are going to get riled up about or upset about, and then doing anything you can to try and construct that narrative by any means necessary, using any kind of effects, completely the reverse of how you'd think news would be made.
Breaking news of the most horrible variety. New Zealand is reeling from a terror attack. Authorities say gunfire erupted inside 2 mosques in the city of Christchurch.
The suspect is believed to have posted an 87-page manifesto on social media before the attack. It is filled with anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric. He talks about invasion.
You've spoken about how the Christchurch terror attack was one of the things that de-radicalized you.
When I got involved in this stuff in 2017, there hadn't really been an attack like that in the last decade, which had been done, using the same kind of rhetoric of the people that were around me, of the people like Lauren Southern or from Rebel Media. So when that happened, that was the final moment. When I turned off my phone, I deleted a lot of social media for a while and distanced myself from all the people I worked with before. But I read that manifesto from the shooter, and it was almost identical to the scripts that Stefan Molyneux was reading from his teleprompter in the documentaries I made, or a lot of the stuff that Lauren Southern was putting out, and it felt completely close.
But that's a profound thing you just said, that when you read the quote-unquote manifesto by a terrorist, that you recognized the same lines that you'd been writing in scripts for your alt-right clients. That's chilling.
It was the same type of speak. It was the same type of stuff about Europeans being replaced or sort of white genocide. All of that kind of stuff felt very close. Those are the kind of people that were around.
I wonder what you saw that might reveal the influence, the direct communication between extreme media voices and conservative politicians from a similar tribe.
Alex Jones would show me messages that he was sending to Trump and to Tucker and saying that he's really good friends with them and there's a really big closeness with them. But I don't know.
You're saying that Alex Jones said he was communicating directly with Donald Trump, President of the United States, and Tucker Carlson at Fox News?
In 2018, that's when I was in his office, that's what he was showing me. But there seemed to be like an ongoing back and forth somehow behind the scenes with a lot of that stuff, which was interesting because I always thought it was very, very separate, right, when I was on the outside.
By the way, all those people in the back are fake news.
All right. Oliver and Kellen, you've both done a lot of work with Alex Jones, albeit on different sides of the equation, with Oliver getting ambushed by him in the halls of the U.S. Capitol, which led to him getting banned for Twitter. Now, that and more when we return.
CNN's like government cheese. It literally is just force-fed to everyone everywhere. Everyone's sick of it.
Far-right conspiracy theorist Alex Jones is now banned on Facebook, YouTube, Apple, and Spotify for breaking the rules. But Twitter is defending its decision not to ban him, even though he broke the rules, they say. We have details live in the CNN newsroom.
Oliver, your reporting, perhaps more than any other, led to the downfall or deplatforming of Alex Jones. But there's one iconic moment where he confronted you.
I was in the halls of Congress, and he was only allowed at this point on Twitter, and he saw me, and I guess he was very upset, probably because he had lost a big platform for advancing his nonsense, and so he started just screaming at me and calling me all sorts of names.
You think you can gaslight people and call for censorship and then a day later say you aren't? We've got all your statements, we've got everything. We've got you all over the place lobbying to have media taken down, lobbying to shut people down, asking people why they're not shut down.
That's not true.
Yes, and engaging in all that. It's all true. We have all the clips of you saying it. Listen, everybody knows who you are.
And ironically, because of the harassment and because he had chosen to live stream it with Twitter's product, Twitter the next day booted him from the only remaining social media platform that he had left. That was really the final straw. Ironically, him complaining to me in very, colorful terms.
It was colorful, and I will say you kept your cool as well. I want to ask you about Tucker Carlson, who is the primetime lead at Fox News. You've said that basically at this point, that he's functioning, in effect, as an extension of Alex Jones. Explain.
Yeah, I think Alex Jones, he might not be on platforms anymore, and his personal footprint has been reduced. The DNA of InfoWars has really become weaved into the DNA of conservative media, and I think you don't see it anywhere as much as in Tucker Carlson. There is very little, if any, daylight at this point between the kind of rhetoric that Tucker Carlson peddles on his show and the type of rhetoric that Alex Jones engages in. I mean, January 6th trutherism stuff, false flag stuff.
It is overwhelming, the evidence that criminal elements of the federal government provocateured and staged January 6th.
FBI operatives were organizing the attack on the Capitol.
What's dangerous about this is he's really mainlined all of this stuff that you would have seen 10 years ago on Alex Jones's program, but he's backed by $1 billion company that purports to be a news organization, and they put his stuff out to millions of viewers every single night, and it's frankly very dangerous.
We are living through the transformation of a formerly democratic republic into something else. We're looking at growing authoritarianism.
One's seen as more respectable, one is, you know, in a skyscraper in New York, and one is in a studio in Texas. That's kind of really the only difference between them. Alex Jones has been banned, but there's a void that's been left, a void of millions of radicalized people that are hungry for extreme content. Tucker recognizes that, and he seems to be happy to fill it.
I do want to get to solutions, because that's, I think, the thing we have least of in these conversations. Money plays a motivating role, and cut off the money, you may reduce some of the problems. But what are some of the other solutions you see, particularly with regard to the dissemination of this hate and division via algorithms on social media?
I think we have to have a conversation about algorithms and their use in regards to political content. I think algorithms are great, John. If you're a big fan of cats, and you go on YouTube and you search for a cat video, and that serves you 20 more cat videos, and you really enjoy that, that seems like a good experience.
Do I look like someone who searches for cats on the internet, Oliver?
I don't know, John. I don't know, John. But maybe it's not wise, John, to use algorithms for politics. Maybe there should be, you know, some sort of a human moderator out there, and you search for a news story, and they select, you know, authoritative sources, and that way you don't have people falling perhaps down these rabbit holes where they become radicalized because they were just seeking some information about a news event.
The first solution is to acknowledge that it's still broken. A lot of people think because Alex was kicked off Twitter and YouTube that it's all fine, and actually, you know, the head of the snake is gone. It's not true at all. I still get recommended my own videos today. I still get recommended the videos that I made for Rebel Media all the time, even though I don't engage with that kind of content. The problem is, right from the beginning, is that the algorithms are giving extreme content to people that aren't even looking for it. It's also about taking away the monetization incentive through YouTube recommendations and through advertising, right? Because it encourages people to make more and more extreme content, and it encourages people to go further down a rabbit hole.
Rarely do we have something resembling consensus with an achievable practical fix, but what I'm hearing is consistent with what you're increasingly hearing in hearings about Facebook and other places. If you fix the financial incentive structure around the algorithm recommendations, you would see less extremism and less conspiracy theories being served up, and therefore probably have less of that in our civic discourse. And that's what's disfigured our democracy to date. You're both doing important work. Thank you, and be well.
Thank
you. Okay, folks. So that was quite informative. And it's an interesting conundrum, because right now we got a major left and we got a major right. There seems to be no middle ground here. It's either far left or far right. And this is in the eyes of the general. Let's make a generalization. So you're on the left or you're on the right. There's nothing, it seems, in between, and that's the way everybody's looking at it. So is there a way to fix that by moderating it? Or the algorithms need to be changed? Well, that's an interesting point of view. So those are the questions that we need to ask. And secondly, a lot is produced in a way to get your attention for monetization. And that is, you know, for a benefit, a financial benefit. So how do we balance all these different factors to come up with a fair representation that takes care of the left, takes care of the right, and all in between? So this is going to be something for a different conversation down the road. But yet at the same time, why we're portraying this here at the beginning is next, we're going to see how it's politicized. So the next video is going to be portraying or just putting it out there so that we can see how or get an idea of how it may be politicized. So we're just going to take a little few seconds to get the video ready. And in the meantime, questions, comments, post in chat or place in the comments section below, please. Okay, so we're going to move to the next video. And what a better way to portray how it's been politicized. Take a candidate from the left, take a candidate from the right. Now, from my perspective, I don't see left or right. But for purposes that and the general construct in society, we've got left and right in America, and pretty much everywhere around the world for that matter. So we're going to have, this is focused on racism in America, a political candidate in the left, political candidate in the right. Okay, so we're going to go to the video. And as I said, any questions, concerns, or anything else, just throw in chat. As well, you can comment below in the event it's after the live stream. So let's switch to the live screen now.
but they choke. You know, the timing, and they go through this and they study this and they work on it all the time. They literally have a quarter of a second to make some of these decisions. And they make a wrong decision, and it's very devastating. But I will say this, I honor law enforcement. We wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for law enforcement. We have to stop this horrible left-wing ideology that seems to be permeating our country. And basically it's weakness. It's weakness on behalf of Democrat politicians. The Republicans, we don't have problems. You take a look at our cities. Our cities are doing very well. They're safe. They're secure. I spent a lot of time in Texas, as you know, just a couple of days ago, and I was with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. He was explaining they wouldn't put up with it for a minute. They just don't have the kind of problems that other people have. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The president is incapable of telling us the truth, incapable of facing the facts, and incapable of healing. He doesn't want to shed light. He wants to generate heat, and he's stoking violence in our cities. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. And those who do it should be prosecuted. Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build. This president long ago forfeited any moral leadership in this country. He can't stop the violence because for years he's fomented it. He may believe mouthing the words law and order makes him strong, but his failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is. Crises under Donald Trump have kept multiplying. COVID, economic devastation, unwarranted police violence, emboldened white nationalists, a reckoning on race, declining faith. The incumbent president who makes things worse, not better. An incumbent president who sows chaos rather than providing order. An incumbent president who fails in the basic duty of the job, which is to advance the truth that all of us know, that we're all born with the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. These are not images of some imagined Joe Biden America in the future. These are images of Donald Trump's America today. He keeps telling you, if only he was president, it wouldn't happen. If he was president, he keeps telling us that he was president, you'd feel safe. Well, he is president, whether he knows it or not. And it is happening. It's getting worse, and you know why? Because Donald Trump adds fuel to every fire. Because he refuses to even acknowledge that there's a racial justice problem in America.
Okay, so there we go. There's that. You've got the left and the right, both portrayed there. Now, the feed for Biden, it already had those spots. So the original recording, whatever, had a loose connection and just kept going in and out. Not much you can do. So now what we're going to do is go to Rittenhouse's message to Biden. So Rittenhouse's message to Biden, dated November 23, 2021, after his not guilty. And I've got to say, his not guilty was, from my perspective, understand it's just my perspective, watching video footage, and I watched this one quite closely. It was very obvious that he acted in self-defense. This may be hard for some people to understand, but if you can't see it, I recommend you look closely at good video of the actual incidents in order to derive an understanding. So From my perspective, it was obvious that Rittenhouse was the victim, believe it or not. And the people that initially were claimed to be the victims, and yeah, they died, so it was a bad situation all around. It's a no-win situation. It's just bad. But let's stick with the fact is we're not going to make everybody happy in this situation. Feel for the victims. But when you look at the actual video footage, you'll understand that Rittenhouse just acted in self-defense. Otherwise, he would have been dead himself. He went there with good intentions, got himself into a situation he was not prepared for, didn't expect, I'm sure, and he just reacted as best he could for his own survivability. So let's look at this is after the trial and the not guilty verdict. And his message to Biden, and there's going to be some commentary from Chris Como in this video, but, take it for what it's worth. But let's look at the message from Rittenhouse for Biden.
House is trying to get people to understand who he is and who he is not. He goes on TV tonight with a guy who says, if Kyle Rittenhouse can save his own life, you can too. What kind of message does that send? Well, we know what it sends. That's why people are trying to have Kyle Rittenhouse gun sales. And you see that the Anti-Defamation League says it's noticed a surge in right-wing calls to arms online, especially after the verdict. See, that's what Rittenhouse has gotten looped into. He says, his lawyer says, it's unfair, it's not who I am. And the response to that on the left has been, well, this is something that we have to put down. We have to put down Rittenhouse as one of these people. And that even went all the way to a campaign ad for President Joe Biden, who used a picture of Kyle Rittenhouse as a white supremacist. He's not that either. Here's his take on that.
What did you make of the President of the United States calling you a white supremacist?
Mr. President, if I could say one thing to you, I would urge you to go back and watch the trial and understand the facts before you make a statement. It's actual malice, defaming my character for him to say something like that.
Now look, I know what you're thinking. He's sitting across from a guy who gives shelter to ugly ideas of white, whatever you want to call it, on a regular basis. This guy is not Tucker Carlson. I know he was there. I know they gave access. Those are bad choices. But I think that there's a lot of bad going on here. And let's discuss now with Van Jones. In terms of what Kyle Rittenhouse and this verdict means and what it doesn't mean, what's your take?
Well, listen, I'm glad he's speaking for himself. I think the reason that you have a lot of shock and anger and frustration from the black community and from progressives is there's never been an African-American kid. You think of 400 years of provocations and bad stuff that's happened and threats against us. There's never been an African-American kid that walked around with an AR-15 and shot 3 people and got held as a hero ever. And it will never happen. And so there's just from the very beginning a sense that there's a two-tier system here where we don't have the right to self-defense in the same way. I don't have a Second Amendment right in the same way. If Van Jones walked down the street with an AR-15, you know what you say about me? It sure was nice knowing Van Jones because I'm not going to have a chance to explain myself. And so you're just dealing with the pain of people. Listen, he got a fair trial. Nobody's arguing anything negative about the jury. Biden himself said, respect the verdict. People respect the verdict. But there's still pain here about this sense of difference. We don't have the right to self-defense in the Second Amendment in the same way that others do. And you do have this vigilante edge that is grabbing onto this. And this vigilante edge seems to think that a certain group of people, almost always white men, can enforce the law themselves, go get guns themselves, and impose the law whenever they want to. And that is a negative.
I mean,
that's
look,
a negative.
Certainly Tucker Carlson is playing at that when he says, if Rittenhouse can save his own life, you can too. I mean, that couldn't be less of the right takeaway from this case. By the way, that Wisconsin law sucks and is part of this move towards stand your ground that removes the duty to retreat. and that you can only use deadly force after you've exhausted all other means. Now, in deference to the outcome in this case, and why I believe it was the right decision in terms of the correct decision under the law for the jury, this guy, Rittenhouse, did retreat. He ran away more than once, which gave him a veil of protection with his jury, obviously. As his counsel, how did you feel about what your client said and the context of which it came out tonight?
Well, I watched a little bit of it. I think it was his feelings, the way he felt treated by the system, maybe his two first lawyers, and those types of things. I think he acquitted himself well. I think he is well spoken for an 18-year-old. He knows what this is about.
And in terms of what this is about, are you comfortable with the prosecution against him being couched by his interviewer and by proxy, by Kyle, because he's sitting there across from the guy, that this was about politics, this was about the media wanting to get him, this was about a mob mentality? Do you really believe that his arrest and the prosecution was exclusively a function of politics?
Nothing is exclusively a function of politics, but there was definitely, I think politics played a huge factor in the rush to judgment in this case and not doing a thorough investigation before first-degree murder charges were put on paper. I mean, he was arrested less than 6.5 hours after this happened on murder charges. They hadn't even found all the evidence. They hadn't done the interviews. And they never, once they got all the evidence, they never went back and looked at it. They just went forward. And I think it's pretty clear when the boss of that office was just a ghost throughout this trial and all these proceedings. You never saw him. He didn't want his hands anywhere near this because I think in the long run, he knew it was going to blow up.
And you said the last time we spoke that if Kyle could do it over again, he wouldn't even have been there that night.
Correct.
Why?
Because look at what happened to him. He went there thinking he was going to do good by somebody, help him out. I don't think he thought that anything like this could ever happen. He now knows that something like this could. He almost lost his life, and if he didn't lose his life, he almost lost his freedom. And I talked to Kyle today, and he's processing it all, but he reiterated today, I would never do that again. And I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. No, I'm here to hear you. Go ahead.
And I get all these emails from people who want to give him another AR-15, and that's not something we're interested in. He wants to go on with his life. He wants to be, relatively quiet and go to college and get a degree and be a productive member of society quietly.
What do you think of those efforts and those moves by satellites in this situation, saying, hey, let's have a Kyle sale until Thanksgiving, a sale on guns because we're celebrating? Or the politicians who have said, oh, I want to give him an internship without knowing anything about the kid, just knowing that he was acquitted. What kind of messages do you think that sends? And you think that's something that Kyle endorses?
I don't think it's something he endorses. I think it sends a message that certain people are morons. They know that if they say the word Rittenhouse in a provocative manner, people are going to cover it and they're going to get publicity for it. And maybe amongst some of their constituents, some people refer to it as the base, it's going to advance their cause. It's profiting on tragedy.
You worried about civil litigation now? Different standard. You don't need unanimous, obviously a unanimous decision from the jury. You worried about that?
Not really. The facts are the same. And who are the aggressors? The one lawsuit that's currently going on, Kyle is not even a named defendant. And, any lawyer who wants to be successful knows that a third of zero is zero. And I just think the lawsuit against Kenosha County, the city of Kenosha and the law enforcement, I think it's laughable. The complaint filed against Kyle on behalf of Mr. Groskowitz doesn't mention the fact that he was armed with a firearm when he went at Kyle. It's based upon one statement, somebody from an MRAP saying, "We appreciate you guys." I don't think that is enough to show that Kyle was acting under color of law or anything along those lines.
Mark Richards, you said a lot of people were commenting on what you said and they don't like this and don't like that. Just to balance it out, we had an avalanche of people saying that you were shocking in terms of your candor, your straightness, and being very even in terms of what you see and what you don't see in this situation and why. So, on balance, in this day and age, I think you came out of this pretty good so far. And I appreciate you doing this interview and being straight with us once again. It's an important night.
Appreciate the time. I hope eventually we can fade into the dark.
Mark Richards, have a very good Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
Okay, so there we go. That was Kyle Rittenhouse, his message to Joe Biden. And also, Mark Richards, the attorney that represented Kyle Rittenhouse and got the not guilty plea, not guilty verdict, sorry, not guilty verdict from the jury. Okay, so you watched at the beginning of that video where Kyle was right in front of Tucker Carlson, and he said Biden defamed him. So Biden has a history of sometimes commenting off the cuff before he knows what really. And I shouldn't make an excuse for him. Let's just leave it. He has a history. Biden has a history of sometimes making comments off the cuff without looking closely at the situation. But one thing about him, Biden's willing, when he's wrong, he's willing to walk it back. Now, you might say, well, that doesn't happen all the time. Or maybe sometimes the chance for that to happen hasn't happened to do that. Nonetheless, I'm not making excuses for him. I just think he's a pretty straight shooter and wears his heart in his sleeve. So let's see Biden's response after the acquittal when he was asked if he stands by his comment that Rittenhouse was a white supremacist, or made the association with white supremacy and Kyle Rittenhouse together. So let's go to that video. Any questions, comments? Post in chat. Also, if you're watching after the fact, post in the comments below, please.
I just heard a moment ago.
Do you have any reaction?
I didn't watch the trial, so
Do you stand by your past comment equating him to white supremacy?
Well, look, I stand by what the jury has concluded. The jury system works, and we have to abide by it.
Sir, what is the state of your health, sir? What is the state of your health after this exam today?
Good. They're going to release all the detail. I feel great. Nothing's changed. We're in great shape.
Okay, so as you had witnessed, he stands by what the jury concluded, and that was the not guilty verdict. So that's his position. This went on the public record so that there's clarity on the subject now on November 19th, 2021. So, does racism exist in America? That is the question. Does racism exist in America? So we're going to pivot to the Arbery trial. And just getting it ready here for you now. So doesn't matter where this video content comes from. It comes from a reliable source. Whether you agree that it's a reliable source or not, they may have their own opinionated slant on topics, etc., etc. It looks like every network has that with any of their commentators or anchors, no doubt about it. But you're going to see actual video footage of a proceeding where a person makes a position known or asks a question or makes a comment or whatever the case may be. So let's not try to give irrelevance to what we're showing here because of where it's coming from, because you're looking at actual factual, that's factual footage. And let's focus on that, and let's focus on the question, does racism exist in America? So let's switch to the video, questions, comments, chat, comment below, and going live now.
In just a couple of hours, the last word in the trial of the 3 men accused of killing Ahmaud Arbery. The prosecutor will deliver a rebuttal to the closing arguments, and we will bring it to you live. It is the final chance to address what was a dramatic and controversial presentation from defense lawyers that some say evoked racist images of the antebellum South. This is what happened in closings. First, the lead prosecutor argued the defendants initiated the encounter with Ahmaud Arbery and were not, as they claim, acting in self-defense.
All three of these defendants made assumptions about what was going on that day, and they made their decision to attack Ahmaud Arbery in their driveways because he was a black man running down the street.
Now, lawyers for Travis McMichael, his father Greg, and William Roddy Bryan painted them as concerned neighbors worried about reports of burglaries in the area, and they blamed Arbery for his own death.
He told you about the thefts and the burglaries, the totality of the facts, why he believed what he did, that he wanted to follow him, that he wanted to talk to him, that he wanted to stop him, for the police to detain him. Don't be fooled by this word arrest. You don't have to announce you're under arrest.
Why isn't Mr. Arbery asking for help? Why isn't he calling out, hey, somebody call 911. There's crazy people after me. Maybe that's because Mr. Arbery doesn't want help.
Turning Ahmaud Arbery into a victim after the choices that he made does not reflect the reality of what brought Ahmaud Arbery to Satilla Shores in his khaki shorts with no socks to cover his long, dirty toenails.
Joining me now, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson and CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Friends, we're going to get to the long, dirty toenails issue in just a moment. First, though, Ellie, I want to address what we're going to see this morning, which is a rebuttal from the prosecution. What exactly is that? And why is it important that it's happening this morning?
So a rebuttal is the final word, is the prosecutor's chance to address and hopefully, if you're the prosecutor, correct all the things that the defense lawyers, in this case 3 of them, just argued. Now, I think there's an interesting tactical advantage to the prosecutor to getting to go this morning. Now, when I was giving rebuttals as a prosecutor, I used to like to try to stand up immediately before the defense lawyer even hit the seat and basically say, everything that guy just said is bogus. However, there's a practical issue with the 4:30 p.m. rebuttal. You've got a jury that's been sitting there all day. They're exhausted. They've heard more information than any human being could process. And the whole time you're going, they're just going to be thinking, oh my God, I got to get to the supermarket. I got to feed my kids. It's 5:15. What's going on? Now they go home, they sleep. You get to open today as the prosecutor. You get the final word. Judge instructs them, they deliberate. The most recent thing they've heard is your rebuttal. So I think there's a nice advantage there for the prosecutors.
Joe, I want to address what we just heard from the defense there. The long, dirty toenails for Ahmaud Arbery. That was from one of the defense attorneys there. I had a chance to speak to Arbery's mother, Wanda Cooper Jones, overnight. This is what she said about the moment. It actually caused her to get up and walk out of the courtroom when that was said. Listen.
It was very, very disturbing. I thought it was very, very rude to talk about his long, dirty toenails and to totally neglect that my son had a huge hole in his chest where he was shot with that shotgun. I sat there for the last 2 weeks and let them dehumanize my son, who wasn't doing anything wrong the day that he chose to go for that afternoon job.
Deplorable and most unfortunate tactic. Listen, I get and understand the defense has a job to do, right? That's the job I do. That's the job we do as defense lawyers. The reality is though you have to thread that needle and thread that line. This was just outwardly and blatantly, in my view, racist. You want to talk about dehumanization? That's what it was about. You have to look at what she said in the context of her larger argument. Her larger argument, John, was about our neighborhood. An interloper coming in here. We had issues with our neighborhood. We had curfews. We were on edge in our neighborhood. And so if you ask me, she's speaking to that 11-1 split, right? Let's address the elephant in the room. We know from the outset that there was 11 white jurors and 1 African-American juror, notwithstanding the demographics of the area, which are 75% white, 25% black. And so I believe that she was really amping that up and trying to wrap her client up in, he is one of you, do not convict. That's not, certainly you want to have the notion of not convicting my client, but to do it in that manner, I just think transcends the bounds of decency and is not what we should be doing.
How does the prosecution deal with that in rebuttal, if at all?
I think the prosecution will deal with that in outstanding fashion. I think the prosecution all along has made the argument that this shouldn't have happened, didn't need to happen, there was no basis in it happening, but not just saying that. Grounding it in law. Why? You talk about citizens arrest law. Citizens arrest applies when you're actually seeing a crime or you have immediate knowledge of a crime. The defense has been arguing about things that happened the week before, 2 weeks before, the month before. No, it's about what happened now. What, John, did the prosecutor say in her, not rebuttal yet, that's this morning, in her initial argument? He was killed because he was a black man walking down the street. She'll get up and say, I told you so, right? And the fact of the matter is that I think when she talks about the prosecutor, the issues of self-defense is not warranted. Why? He wasn't engaging, that is Ahmaud Arbery, in any felony. He didn't provoke, they provoked. They were the initial aggressor. This is part and parcel, the prosecution will argue, of an issue that didn't need to happen. It happened predicated upon race. And you know what? Their defense lawyer told you so. She'll slam them today.
Do you think the prosecution needs to address that really controversial, some would say deplorable comment? And what else, Ellie, do you think the prosecution needs to do this morning?
Yeah, so I agree with Joe. I think if the prosecution does its job well today, they can turn that right back around on the defense, right? They can argue, you heard a lot of things from both defense lawyers that was either, I think, explicitly almost racist with the long toenails, but also a lot of coded stuff with the neighborhood. And there was a lot of talk from the defense lawyers about the panic, the worry, the concern of the people in this neighborhood, that their way of life was being threatened. And I think you turn that around and you say, that's why they overreacted, folks. That's why this was not a legitimate citizen's arrest, because they were not acting rationally, these defendants. They were acting rashly and unfairly. And that's why they jumped to conclusions, getting back to the prosecution's defense, and made what the prosecutor called driveway decisions. I do think it's worth noting just the grace of Ms. Cooper Jones. I mean, to sit through this trial, to have her son, to see son attacked like that, and to just put on the demonstration of grace that she showed in that interview is remarkable.
Can I ask about one thing that I noticed in the defense yesterday that we hadn't seen directly before? It's 3 separate defendants here who have 3 different sets of interests. And the attorney for Roddy Bryant at the end there, in his closing, seemed to be suggesting, you know what, my client's a different matter here. There may have been a crime, but my client was just filming it. In fact, you wouldn't even know there was a crime if my client wasn't there. And if I'm in the jury, I might be thinking, is this one of the defense lawyers saying that the other 2 guys are guilty?
Well, it is. But the problem, John, is that should have been capitalized at the outset. what you do as a defense lawyer or prosecutor is you have a theme and a theory. And I thought that the theory he had at the end actually resonated. You know, my client had no intent. He was there. He's in the neighborhood. No one knows him. He saw something happening. He didn't have a gun with him at all. He didn't have a rifle with him at all. He just happened upon a scene. He filmed it. He cooperated. What's he doing here? It was those guys who did it. He didn't even make an opening statement. Had he made the opening statement and put his theory out there, right, and repeatedly every witness, sir, it's fair to say that my client, you knew that he came after the fact. Is that right, officer? And you knew he filmed it. Is that right? And he cooperated with you. Is that true also? So if you had that out there as a long-standing matter, I think it would have been more effective than at the end to come and then to say, oh, by the way, he was just there. And so, you know, we'll see how it resonates at the end of the day. I just think it was a lost opportunity not to do that from the outset.
George Jackson, Ellie Honig, thank you both very much.
Okay, folks, we're going to move to the next video. I'm going to prepare it now. It's not going to take us very long, just a matter of half a minute to get it prepared maximum. So the question here today is, does racism exist in America? So the next video I'm going to get ready. We'll have it up on the screen within about 15 to 30 seconds. Okay, so what we're looking at here now, folks, is actual footage. We're going to be we're going to see a commentator present her whatever, it doesn't matter. But you're going to see live video of the judge in the Arbery murder trial calling out the defense team for what he felt was a lack of appropriateness in his court. So let's move to the live screen now.
Here in just a few hours, prosecutors will resume their case in the murder trial of 3 men charged in the death of Ahmaud Arbery. The judge Monday rejecting the defense request for a mistrial and blasting one attorney for comments objecting to black pastors being in the courtroom. CNN's Martin Savage is live for us in Brunswick, Georgia. Martin, tell us the latest here.
Morning, Brianna. Yeah, for a time it looked like this case was going to come to an abrupt and ugly ending, not because of what was said on the witness stand, but because of what was heard and seen in the courtroom.
In the context of this trial, we object to his presence in the public gallery inside the courtroom.
An explosive morning in the trial of the 3 men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery, with a still smoldering racially charged debate spurred on by defense attorneys over black pastors in the courtroom.
If somebody is in the gallery here as a member of the public, that's their right to be here, and I'm not going to track individual members of the public who come in and out of this courtroom.
Defense attorney Kevin Goff objecting to Reverend Jesse Jackson's presence in the gallery.
How many pastors does the Arbery family have? We had the Reverend Al Sharpton here earlier, last week. Which pastor is next? Is Raphael Warnock going to be the next person appearing this afternoon? We don't know. Your Honor, I would submit, with all respect to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, that this is no different than bringing in police officers or uniformed prison guards in a small town where a young black man has been accused of assaulting a law enforcement officer or corrections officer.
This a recurring issue for William Roddy Bryan's defense attorney in a trial where race has been front and center. Jackson arrived at court Monday morning after Goff said this on Thursday.
We don't want any more black pastors coming in here or other Jesse Jackson, whoever was in here earlier this week, sitting with the victim's family, trying to influence a jury in this case. If a bunch of folks came in here dressed like Colonel Sanders with white masks sitting in the back, I mean, that would be a problem.
He was actually referencing the Reverend Al Sharpton, who was in the courtroom on Wednesday to support Arbery's family. Goff apologized to the court on Friday, but brought up the issue again Monday. Judge Timothy Walmsley rebuked the defense attorney.
Now, with individual members or individuals coming into the courtroom, I will say that is directly in response, Mr. Goff, to statements you made, which I find reprehensible. The Colonel Sanders statement you made last week, I would suggest may be something that has influenced what is going on here. You need to understand, everybody, that your words in this courtroom have an impact on a lot of what's going on.
Ahmaud Arbery's neighbor, Carol Flowers, was called as a witness. During her testimony, Arbery's mother began to cry when a photo of her son alive was shown. The emotion leading to a break. After that break, Goff asked the judge to again take account of every person in the gallery, saying he was fearful certain individuals could sway the jury by being present, adding,
Your Honor, the case law out there in mob cases and other cases demonstrates all the ways that presence in a gallery can influence jurors in a case. And I certainly don't mean to suggest that Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson or any other pastor belong to a mob, but at the same time, we are talking about organized behavior by whoever outside the courthouse leading up to this case, where we have all these community leaders fearful that the city's going to burn down.
That's when all three defense attorneys moved for a mistrial, claiming their clients were not receiving a fair trial, also citing Arbery's mother's emotions.
Based on that outburst, the court is not granting a mistrial.
Jackson said this later outside the courthouse.
As for them challenging my right to be there, the judge stood with my constitutional right to be there and my moral obligation to be there. I'm about people who are in need, whose backs against the wall. That's what we do. So we're going to keep staying with this family. It's a priority focus of ours now.
The trial resumed in the afternoon with a series of forensic experts testifying about fingerprints, fibers, and enhancements made to a cell phone video. That video shows Arbery's death on February 23, 2020, after he was chased by Gregory and Travis McMichael, an armed father and son, and their neighbor, William Roddy Bryan. The three pursued the 25-year-old in their pickup trucks before cornering him and Travis McMichael shooting him. The prosecution presented the weapon used in the shooting and even showed images of holes in Arbery's shirt.
Could you show the jury how close that gun would be to that T-shirt?
A firearms expert for the Georgia Bureau of Investigations testified that Arbery was shot at close range.
The end of the shotgun was very close to that fabric when it was fired. But to have something that large, it had to be made by in my opinion, made by the gas from the tearing of the large amount of gas that exits the end of the barrel of the weapon. Also observed is the rolling of the fabric where the edges of it are seared and rolled up.
Arbery's mother reportedly kept her eyes closed during the replays of the cell phone video of her son's last moments. She later said she was satisfied with the prosecution's case.
The state is doing a very fantastic job in presenting the evidence in the case. I'm very confident that we will get justice for Ahmaud.
As he was getting into his car last evening after trial, I caught up with attorney Kevin Goff, and I asked him what's next. He implied he was going to be busy last night working on a new motion. What that motion is about, we're not quite clear, but it's pretty obvious we haven't heard the last on the issue of black pastors and the threat he believes they pose to this case. Brianna and John.
Wow. Martin, thank you so much.
Joining me now is Charles Coleman, civil rights attorney and former prosecutor and trial attorney. Counselor, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We don't want any more black pastors here. How many black pastors does the Arbery family have? What's the strategy behind what defense attorney Kevin Goff is doing?
Well, the strategy, John, is simply to try and appeal to the lowest common denominator, the lowest common factor that he can in terms of throwing out a Hail Mary in hopes that somebody is going to leak something to the jury and potentially get someone on the same wavelength that he is in terms of picking up what he's putting down. He has decided he's going to go all out in terms of putting down the dog whistle and picking up the bullhorn around what it is to shout and spout racist rhetoric as a means of trying to connect to the 11 white jurors on that jury as opposed to the one black. I have long said that race is the 13th juror in this case. It is being held in Brunswick, Georgia, and from the outset, what we saw with respect to jury selection and how this trial has proceeded, and with Bryant's with Go's repeated attempts to keep certain people out of this courtroom, it is undeniable that he is trying to play the race card when it comes to securing something for his client.
I don't think you would deny it. I really don't, in a way. William Barber, by the way, last week told Brianna, and I thought it was very notable. He said, I'm not a black pastor. I'm a pastor.
Right.
I'm a pastor. So these are pastors who are in the courtroom there. And what the defense is doing is just blatant. There's no subtlety to it. I want to focus in on something you said there, though, because all these speeches have been made with the jury out of the courtroom, out of the courtroom. So he's got to be thinking then, or hoping, that somehow they catch wind of this.
Not just that. I think that's a big part of it. I think he's hoping that at some point something leaks and he's able to connect with one of the jurors with what it is that he said. Not necessarily directly, but through what's going on in the news. We're talking about it. It's being talked about everywhere. He's hoping that someone gets wind of it and begins to think about it as they look across the room into the gallery of that courtroom and they see these prominent figures there. But there's another angle to it as well. He's trying to do whatever he can to make an issue for appeal out of for his client in case he's convicted. I don't think that this is a viable issue for appeal. I don't think that it's an issue that he can ultimately win on appeal if his client is convicted, but it is something that he's trying to create a record around in case that happens.
We heard the judge call it reprehensible.
Yes.
What more could the judge or should the judge be doing in your mind, if anything?
Well, I think the judge did the right thing in this case in terms of calling it reprehensible, in terms of denying the mistrial and being very direct. You know, John, this reminds me a lot of the famous 1857 decision of Dred Scott versus Sanford. And in that case, the Supreme Court of the United States said that the black man in America had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And I think about the whispers of Dred Scott along with what is going on with this case. Ahmaud Arbery, in the eyes of the McMichael family and Mr. Bryant, did not have the right to go into a house and look at what was going on and go jogging. And now, according to Bryant's attorney, Mr. Go, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, and other black pastors do not have the right to sit in a trial and comfort Ahmaud Arbery's family. That family deserves to be comforted by anyone who they well choose, and anyone who is sitting there not trying to influence that trial, but interested in justice for Ahmaud Arbery should be allowed to be there.
Would he have a similar objection if it was a white pastor?
Great question.
Okay. So we get back to the question, does racism exist in America? That's what you need to ask. Any questions, comments? Please post. But understand, does racism exist in America? Based on what you've seen here today, can you answer that question? Can you make a comment? Do you have an opinion? Let us know. So I'd like to thank you for watching. This is Michael J. Till the next time, take care, folks, and all the best. Stay safe, okay? Thank you very much.